Picture this, the most electrifying player in women's basketball, a woman who just months ago was draining logo threes over outstretched defenders and threading no-look passes that left entire arenas gasping, is now hunched over at half court, both hands planted on her knees, face twisted in a kind of pain that has nothing to do with toughness or lack thereof. The crowd goes quiet. Not the polite quiet of a free throw, the real quiet, the kind where people stop breathing for a second because something feels genuinely wrong. That moment happened not once this season, not twice, 4 times. 4 separate lower body breakdowns in under 2 months, and each time, the Indiana Fever stepped in front of the cameras with the same tired answer: day to day, minor discomfort, she's progressing well. And every single time, the basketball world nodded, moved on, and waited for the next update that never really came. But here's what they haven't told you. What's happening to Caitlin Clark right now isn't just a physical story. It's a story about power. Who has it, who's abusing it, and what gets sacrificed when a league decides that a player's marketability matters more than her body. Because somewhere between the sold-out arenas, the record TV ratings, and the endless stream of jersey sales, the Indiana Fever and the WNBA at large made a quiet, devastating calculation, and Caitlin Clark is the one paying for it. This is the injury crisis they don't want you to understand, and once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. By the time Clark went down against the Connecticut Sun, the people who were actually paying attention had already spotted something the Fever's injury reports were carefully avoiding. This wasn't a random piece of bad luck. This was a cascade, a chain reaction, and it had been building since the very first week of the season. It started with the left quad, described as tightness, managed with rest and treatment, cleared in time for the next game. Then the left groin went. Same story, different press release. Then the right groin. And then, before anyone could fully process what was unfolding, the same lower body region flared again on the opposite side at a completely different angle of stress. Orthopedic specialists, not connected to the Fever, not on the record, but experienced enough to read the pattern from the outside, have a name for what's happening here: compensatory injury cycling. It's not complicated once you understand it. When one part of the body sustains damage and isn't given proper time to fully recover, the surrounding muscles and tendons begin absorbing extra load to protect the injured area. They overcompensate, and eventually that overcompensation creates its own breakdown somewhere else entirely. It's a domino effect wearing the disguise of bad luck. Left side gets hurt, right side picks up the slack. Right side collapses, left side tightens up again in response. Round and round it goes, and the only thing that stops it is complete, genuine, and forced rest. What Clark has been getting instead is managed minutes and reassurances. Multiple specialists who reviewed the public footage and timeline without being given access to her actual medical records have noted that the pattern of injuries Clark is experiencing is not consistent with a day-to-day classification, not even close. The realistic recovery window for this kind of cascading soft tissue damage done properly is measured in weeks, not days, and only if the athlete is fully removed from competition, given a structured rehabilitation protocol, and shielded from the physical demands of travel, promotional commitments, and practice intensity. Instead, Clark has been crossing zones, playing heavy minutes, and smiling for cameras every single week. The Fever knew the severity. They had to. Any competent medical staff does. The question was never whether they knew. The question was what they chose to do with that information. And the answer to that question reveals something uncomfortable about how this league actually operates when a generational player becomes a financial asset. Before the season even tipped off, warning signs were already embedded in Clark's situation. They just weren't visible yet to anyone watching from the outside. Reports from people close to her training circle indicate that Clark came into her professional debut having added significant muscle mass over the offseason.
The reasoning was understandable. The WNBA is a physical league. Veterans had made it abundantly clear that the college game Clark dominated was a different sport, at a different speed, with a different level of physical confrontation. So she bulked up. She put in the work to build a body that could absorb the contact and keep playing through it.
But here's what the fitness world understands that casual observers often miss. Adding muscular mass without a carefully integrated movement adaptation process can quietly wreak havoc on an athlete's biomechanics. Muscles that are newly developed and still adjusting to the body's overall movement patterns change everything. Stride length, hip positioning, the subtle angles at which the knees and ankles absorb force, even something as refined as a shooting release can shift when the muscle groups supporting it are proportioned differently than they've ever been before. Clark's movement patterns, the ones she'd spent her entire life building, the ones that made her a consensus #1 pick, were subtly disrupted by a body that was technically stronger but biomechanically in transition. And then the WNBA schedule arrived. There is no gentle entry point in professional women's basketball, no grace period for a rookie body to find its rhythm. The schedule hits like a wall, back-to-back games across multiple time zones with travel that would challenge a seasoned veteran, layered on top of the unprecedented media and promotional obligations that came specifically with being Caitlin Clark. While her teammates were getting whatever slim recovery windows the schedule allowed, Clark was adding press junkets, sponsor appearances, and nationally televised spotlights on top of an already brutal physical load. A biomechanics specialist who works with professional track athletes described a scenario like Clark's plainly. When you change a high-level athlete's movement foundation and then immediately subject them to elite-level competition without an adaptation buffer, you are essentially running a finely tuned engine on the wrong fuel. It doesn't fail immediately, it runs. It might even run well for a while, but the wear is happening underneath the surface, invisible, accumulating, waiting for the moment the system can't absorb anymore. That moment arrived 4 times this season, and the fever acted surprised each time. There are sports moments that function as turning points, not because of what happened in the game, but because of what they revealed about everything surrounding it. The Fever-Sun matchup was one of those moments. When Clark went down, it wasn't the mechanics of the injury that stopped people. Athletes get hurt, that's the reality of professional sports, and anyone who watches long enough understands it. What stopped people was her reaction. Because Caitlin Clark, a competitor so mentally locked in that she'd been playing through obvious physical discomfort for weeks without so much as letting a grimace linger, came off that court looking like something had genuinely broken. Not just the groin, something deeper. She winced going to the bench. She bent forward, the universal athletic posture of someone trying to breathe through serious pain. And then, on the sideline, there were tears. Real ones. Not the kind athletes sometimes shed in the heat of a big moment or a charged game. These were the kind that come out when frustration and fear and physical agony and emotional exhaustion all hit at exactly the same time, and there's simply nowhere left to put it. The body had been carrying more than muscle strain. It had been carrying months of being told it was fine when it wasn't, months of being put back out there before it was ready, months of a grind that never paused long enough for real healing to begin. And what did the Indiana Fever officially call it? Slight discomfort. Think about that framing for a moment. A player in visible tears, grimacing through movement, missing time after her 4th lower body injury in 8 weeks, and the organization's chosen language is slight discomfort. There's a reason that phrasing is chosen so carefully. It manages expectations without closing any doors. It keeps sponsors calm. It avoids triggering clauses that might mandate a longer official absence. It keeps the product on the floor.
The comparison everyone reached for was obvious and warranted. If a top 5 NBA player, if someone at LeBron's level or Steph Curry's level, broke down in their rookie season 4 times in 2 months and sat on the bench crying, the entire sports media apparatus would stop. There would be specialist press conferences, there would be detailed timelines, there would be accountability questions directed at the franchise and the league. The player's long-term health would be the only conversation happening. What Caitlin Clark got was a press release written like a weather update. Here's the part that tells you everything you need to know about where this situation actually stands. Caitlin Clark is no longer relying solely on the Indiana Fever's medical staff.
That's not a rumor floating around social media. That's been confirmed by people with direct knowledge of the situation. She and her team have begun assembling an independent group of specialists, outside professionals who have no connection to the organization and therefore no organizational incentive to minimize what they're seeing. Biomechanical evaluators who specialize in movement pattern correction for elite athletes. Regenerative medicine consultants, whose work is typically associated with NBA and Olympic-level recovery programs. Specialists in soft tissue rehabilitation, who approach injury not just as something to patch and push through, but as a structural problem to actually solve. The treatments reportedly being explored go well beyond what the Fever's standard protocols offer. Biomechanical retraining to identify and correct the exact movement imbalances that started this chain of injuries in the first place. Stem cell therapy targeted at accelerating tissue repair in the damaged muscle fibers. Hyperbaric oxygen chamber sessions designed to reduce inflammation and push more healing oxygen into stressed tissue at a cellular level. This isn't recovery, this is a full reset. An acknowledgement that the approach taken so far has not just failed to fix the problem, it has actively made it worse. When a player of this caliber starts building a medical infrastructure that operates entirely outside the organization that employs her, it sends a signal that cannot be walked back. Trust, once it fractures at this level, doesn't repair itself with a good week of practice and a positive injury update. The Fever had every opportunity to handle this the right way, to bring in the best available resources, to make Clark's long-term health the undisputed top priority, to communicate transparently with her and with the public. They didn't, and now the player most valuable to their franchise, most valuable to the league, most valuable to the entire ecosystem of women's basketball in this moment, has decided she needs people in her corner who aren't also managing a brand. You cannot overstate how significant that shift is. It's not just a medical decision, it's a declaration. To understand why the Fever handled this the way they did, you have to understand what Caitlin Clark actually represents to them, not as a basketball player, but as a financial instrument. Her jerseys have consistently ranked among the top selling in the entire league since before she played a single professional minute. Her presence in the starting lineup has a measurable, documented effect on ticket sales, broadcast viewership numbers, and in-arena attendance that extends beyond anything the WNBA has seen from a single player in its modern era. Sponsors built campaign timelines around her availability. Networks structured broadcast packages with the assumption that she would be playing. The entire commercial apparatus of the Indiana Fever, and in meaningful ways the WNBA itself, is calibrated around Caitlin Clark being on the court and performing at a level that generates content, conversation, and consumer engagement. So when her body starts signaling that it needs time, real time, not managed minutes and optimistic press releases, the organization doesn't experience that as a medical situation first. They experience it as a business emergency. Every game she misses is a ticket holder who bought specifically to see her that night. Every week she's limited is a sponsor activation that loses its anchor. Every injury update that mentions anything more serious than day-to-day is a potential ripple through broadcast deals, merchandise projections, and the league's pitch to future investors about its growth trajectory. This is the machine that produces the language of slight discomfort.
Not malice exactly, though negligence is a fair word. It's the institutional reflex of an organization that has allowed its commercial interests to become structurally entangled with a single player's body in a way that makes genuinely prioritizing her health almost impossible without significant financial consequence. Trainers who might otherwise push for a longer shutdown find themselves navigating pressure from above. Coaches who want to protect her playing time have to balance that against ownership and front office expectations. The PR team translates every medical update through the filter of what the market can absorb. And Clark gets managed minutes instead of rest, reassurances instead of honest timelines, a smile on media day instead of the truth. The fans who buy the jerseys and fill the seats are told everything is fine. Everything has not been fine. One of the more striking and underreported dimensions of this entire situation is how few voices inside the league have publicly forcefully and specifically stood up for Caitlin Clark's right to be properly protected.
There are veterans in this league who have spent careers grinding through exactly the kind of mismanagement Clark is experiencing right now. Women who played through serious injuries on inadequate resources, who traveled in conditions that no male professional athlete in a comparable league would have tolerated, who built the foundation that made it possible for the WNBA to attract the kind of spotlight it currently has. Those voices carry weight. Their experience is relevant. And yet, when it comes to clearly naming what is happening to Clark and demanding better, the response from the broader player community has been largely muted. Occasional supportive tweets, quiet expressions of concern, but nothing coordinated, nothing loud. Part of that silence has a complicated explanation. Clark did not arrive in the WNBA the way most rookies do. She arrived as a phenomenon. Before she'd played a professional game, she had endorsement deals that eclipsed what many veterans had accumulated over entire careers. She had national media attention that most players in this league never experience at any point. She had a commercial profile that changed the financial conversation around the sport almost overnight. And while the vast majority of her teammates and peers have handled that dynamic with professionalism and genuine class, the underlying tension is real. There is a quiet friction between the players who built this league in relative anonymity and the player who arrived and immediately became its most visible face, its most commercially valuable asset, and the subject of more coverage than everyone else combined. Inside the Fever's locker room specifically, reports suggest an atmosphere that has grown genuinely complex. Veterans who have every right to expect organizational attention to their development, their contracts, their health, have noticed how comprehensively the organization's resources and focus are oriented around Clark. There are quiet frustrations about rotations, about minutes, about the perception that one player's needs automatically supersede everyone else's. None of this is Clark's fault. She didn't design the system, she didn't ask to be made the sun around which everything else orbits, but she's caught in the center of it, and paradoxically, she's also the one being most failed by it. The organization built the team around her visibility without actually building the team, and now everyone is feeling the consequences, Clark most of all. There's a version of this season that goes entirely differently, and it's not hypothetical. It's what competent player-first franchise management actually looks like. The moment Clark pulled the left quad in the early weeks of the season, the correct response was immediate and clear: shut her down. Not game-time decisions and reduced minutes, not checking her movement in warm-ups and hoping the body cooperates. Full stop. 2 to 3 weeks of complete rest with simultaneous activation of whatever specialist resources the organization could bring in, regardless of cost, regardless of schedule implications. That initial injury gets treated not as an inconvenience to be managed, but as the beginning of a story that could go very badly if the chapter isn't closed properly the first time. The rehab protocol built around that shutdown doesn't just address the original injury, it investigates why the injury happened, which movement patterns contributed, which muscle imbalances were already present, which aspects of the training load and travel schedule created the conditions for breakdown. It corrects those things before she returns to full competition. The coaching staff adapts its game planning around her absence rather than rushing her back to make the adaptation unnecessary. The PR team frames the shutdown as organizational discipline, a team committed to sustainable excellence rather than short-term results. Fans respect that narrative. It actually builds trust rather than eroding it. What Indiana did instead reads like a case study in how not to handle a franchise player's health. She was back on the court before the tissue had healed. The minute restrictions were applied inconsistently and quietly abandoned when game situations demanded more from her. Health updates were timed and worded to minimize alarm rather than maximize transparency. Cameras would catch coaches reacting to her flinching mid-play with the same expression they'd use for a missed defensive rotation, a studied neutrality that communicated above everything else that the show must go on.
Clark's camp noticed all of it. Her agent, her advisors, the people from her Iowa circle who know her body and her game better than any Fever staff member has had time to learn, they've been watching. And what they've been quietly doing in response is building the parallel infrastructure described earlier: the outside specialists, the independent rehabilitation team, the support system that operates with Clark's long-term interests as the only variable that matters. When that kind of separation starts happening between a player and her organization, it's not just a warning, it's a clock, and it's already been ticking. Let's be straightforward about something that league insiders, franchise executives, and sports business analysts are already discussing in terms that are far less euphemistic than what appears in public. Caitlin Clark's situation in Indiana is not stable, and the instability has a deadline attached to it. Rookie contracts in the WNBA don't last forever. When Clark reaches free agency, she will be arguably the most sought-after player in the history of the league's open market, not just for what she does on the court, but for what her presence does to every commercial metric a franchise cares about. Every team with cap flexibility and organizational ambition will be constructing a pitch. And the pitch won't have to be complicated. It will essentially be, come somewhere that actually takes care of you. The franchises already most discussed in this context aren't secrets. The New York Liberty have the market, the infrastructure, and the organizational credibility of a team that has consistently invested in building a genuine contender rather than simply acquiring a star. The Las Vegas Aces have demonstrated a player-first culture that produces championships and retains talent because players believe the organization actually has their long-term interests in mind. These aren't teams scrambling to make room. They're teams that understood this moment was coming and have been quietly positioning for it. And then there's the Nike dimension, because Clark's endorsement relationship with Nike is not incidental to this conversation. It is structurally relevant. Nike has enormous investments in Clark's profile and enormous incentives to see that profile maximized in the largest, most visible markets possible. The idea that Nike's internal conversations about Clark's future market placement have no influence on how the broader situation develops is naive at best. Sponsorship structures at this level of investment don't sit passively while organizational dysfunction threatens the asset they've built campaigns around. If the Fever want to keep her, genuinely keep her, not just retain her grudgingly through a contract year, they have to do something they have consistently failed to do so far. They have to demonstrate through action rather than press releases that Caitlin Clark's body and long-term health are more important to the organization than any single game, any single broadcast window, any single merchandise revenue quarter. They have to build something around her rather than simply building on top of her, and they are running out of time to make that case convincingly. The departure, if it comes, won't be emotional. Clark is not the type. It will be a calm, calculated decision made by a competitor who has identified the environment most likely to allow her to be great for a long time and realized that environment isn't the one she's currently in. Here's what the WNBA's leadership seems to have genuinely, structurally underestimated about this moment: the fan base that Caitlin Clark helped bring into women's basketball, and the deeply invested fan base that was already there, is not a passive audience that receives official statements and moves on. These are people who read injury reports the way analysts read financial filings, who follow sports medicine professionals on social media specifically to understand what the clinical language in those reports actually means, who dissect game footage frame by frame, looking for the subtle gait changes, the favored limbs, the moments of hesitation that precede a breakdown. There are Reddit threads and Twitter communities where kinesiology discussions happen at a level of sophistication that would surprise the people writing the Fever's injury updates. Every time Clark flinches on a lateral cut, someone clips it. Every time she favors one side coming out of a screen, someone timestamps it. Every time a coach's body language communicates something different from what the press release said 6 hours earlier, someone is watching and saving and sharing. You cannot manage this audience the way sports organizations managed audiences in an earlier era, when information was slower and people had fewer tools to verify what they were being told. Those tools now exist. They're free, they're widely used, and the audience deploying them is deeply motivated. The credibility gap that the Indiana Fever and the WNBA have opened by consistently understating Clark's situation is not hypothetical damage. It is real, measurable erosion of the trust that makes the entire ecosystem function. Fans who feel deceived don't become neutral, they become hostile. They don't just stop believing the next injury report, they start assuming the worst about everything the organization says, retroactively and going forward. The hashtags already circulating, the ones demanding transparency, calling out the management failures, questioning whether Clark is deliberately run into the ground for financial reasons, aren't fringe sentiment. They represent a mainstream fan reaction to a credibility collapse that the organization created and has so far shown no serious interest in repairing.
The league had an opportunity to get ahead of this, to use Clark's arrival as the catalyst for genuine structural modernization, better travel standards, transparent medical reporting, enforceable player protection protocols, real consequences for organizations that mishandle star athletes. Instead, it chose the short-term comfort of ambiguity. And now it's discovering that ambiguity in the information environment of 2025 ages extremely badly. Pull back far enough from Caitlin Clark's specific situation, and the shape of what's actually happening becomes clear. This isn't ultimately a story about one player and one bad organizational decision. It's a story about an entire professional sports league at an inflection point, a moment where the distance between what the WNBA is presenting itself as and what it actually is for the athletes inside it has become too visible to paper over. The league's aspirations are genuine, and the growth of the past few years is real. Television deals that would have been unimaginable a decade ago, attendance numbers that validate what advocates of women's basketball have been arguing forever. A generation of players whose talent, athleticism, and basketball IQ compares favorably with any professional league in the world. All of that is true, and all of it matters. But a league that aspires to stand alongside the NBA, the NFL, the elite tiers of global professional sports cannot continue operating with infrastructure designed for a much smaller, much less visible enterprise. The medical standards have to evolve, the travel conditions have to be modernized, the injury reporting has to become something other than a PR management tool. The gap between what organizations owe their players in terms of genuine care and what they're actually delivering has to close, because that gap is now being examined by a national audience with the tools and the motivation to see it clearly. Caitlin Clark became the face of this reckoning not because she asked for it, but because her arrival made everything that was already broken impossible to ignore. The attendance spike she triggered brought scrutiny along with it. The broadcast deals illuminated the dysfunction as much as they celebrated the talent. She is a generational basketball player who also became, inadvertently, a mirror held up to a league that had to decide whether it liked what it saw. The league has a chance,
right now, while this moment is still live and the conversation is still happening, to demonstrate that the answer is change, real change. Not a press release promising to examine protocols, actual structural transformation that athletes can point to and say, that happened because someone finally treated us like the professionals we are. Whether they take it is the most important question in women's basketball right now. Not who wins the championship, not which rookie breaks the next record. Whether the people running this league look at what is happening to their most visible player and decide that it cannot happen again. Caitlin Clark came into the WNBA carrying more weight than any individual athlete should ever have to carry. Not just the weight of her own expectations, and those were enormous, but the weight of a league's financial future, a sport's cultural credibility, and a generation of young athletes who needed to see what it looks like when women's basketball gets treated with the seriousness it deserves. She's been carrying that weight through a groin that wasn't healed, through a quad that needed more time than it was given, through a body that kept signaling distress while the people responsible for responding to that signal chose language over action, appearances over accountability. But here's what's also true. She is not finished, not even close. What's happening off the court right now, the independent medical team being assembled, the outside specialists being brought in, the quiet but comprehensive reclaiming of control over her own health, is not a story of defeat. It's a story of an elite competitor understanding exactly what the problem is and doing what elite competitors do. She's solving it, on her terms, without waiting for permission. The comeback is coming, but it won't be on anyone else's timeline. It won't be because a press release declared her day-to-day and a coach decided the matchup was favorable. It will be because Caitlin Clark, with full information and full agency, decided she was ready. And when that happens, the version of her that steps back onto that court will have been through something that most athletes never have to face, a full confrontation with the systems that were supposed to protect her and chose not to. That experience changes people. It clarifies things. It makes very obvious who is actually in your corner and who is managing you. And it permanently rearranges priorities in ways that tend to produce either a harder, more focused competitor or a player who walks away and finds somewhere better to direct her energy. The WNBA should be hoping very hard for the former. And if they want to make that outcome more likely, they know exactly what they need to do. The question is whether they'll do it before she makes the decision for them.